Chapter 45, Corruption, Allies. The three figures that walked down the ice ramp of the ship were both quite distinctive and visibly alien, just barely humanoid as far as the ponies could tell. The first was pale blue, gradiating to white on some parts of his body, black on others. His body was somewhere between crystalline ice and flesh in texture, and there were no features on his face with which to read expressions. There were only two yellow dots of eyes to even denote that it was his face. One notable distinction was a portion of his torso that looked like some sort of scar, which shone bright blue and was far more ice than flesh in appearance. He walked right up to Samus and Spike. "It is good to see you both again," he stated calmly, bowing respectfully. "Good to see you too, Rundas," Samus replied, returning the bow. "I'd have thought that would have fully healed by now," Spike spoke up, indicating the bright blue scarring. "It has," Rundas replied. "However, I have chosen to leave the sealing scab of ice in place, to remind me of the event. I still owe you a life debt, Spike." Spike rubbed the back of his head nervously. "Now don't overwhelm the poor boy," the second figure stated as he walked up. His body was almost entirely robotic, with only the brain visible through the transparent casing of his head unit indicating this was a cyborg and not an android. His limbs were somewhat spindly, plainly not built for strength. However, the numerous manipulators and interface points along the length of all the limbs indicated that this was because his body was designed to interface with other machines. "You know how flustered he gets when people hero worship him." Samus chuckled a bit. "Funny meeting you here, Gore," she greeted. "How'd you find your way here?" "We received a signal that you were here," he explained. "We decided it would be nice to stop by and reminisce." "But that one makes her own way home," Rundas growled, gesturing back at the third figure still making her way down the ramp. "How is it no one slit her throat for talking so much before?" "They probably have," Gore replied. "But she's pure energy. It wouldn't kill her." He glanced around, not noticing how unnerved the ponies were getting from the line of the conversation. "Such a curious world you hail from, Spike," he commented in his synthesized voice. "There's so much I could learn here." Spike nearly choked on his laughter when he saw how Twilight's eyes lit up at that statement. However, his expression changed to nervousness as the third figure approached. She was most definitely female, and the most humanoid in appearance of the trio. Her entire body was blue and pink, glowing with energy, with her gray skeletal structure visible through her flesh. Her eyes sparked with mischief, and she had a coy smirk on her face. If one looked closely, however, they would spy what looked like green fire running here and there where veins and arteries should have been. She sauntered up to Spike, her hips swaying enticingly as she completely ignored Samus. Well, Spike, is this how you treat a lady? I honestly never thought that was how you were. You never called, you never rode, shame on you." Spike stepped back a bit nervously. "Oh, sorry Gandrita, things were kind of busy. Didn't realize I should. But after all we shared?" Gandrita pouted, fluttering her eyelashes at him. "We did so much together. Well, and the way you stole that kiss," she breathed enticingly. "Excuse me?" Rarity gasped out in shock. "It wasn't like that," Spike shouted. "I was trying to save your life." "And you succeeded beyond your wildest dreams," Gandrita purred, attempting to press herself up against Spike only for him to flee into the upper branches of the Crystal Tree Palace. She then giggled. "He's just so cute when he's flustered." "Funny you three should be here now, bringing all that up," Samus interrupted. "Spike and I were just telling his friends and family on this world of his adventures, and we'd just gotten to the mission you're all talking about. Perhaps we could join you then," Gore offered. "Give a perspective on events the two of you can't provide." "Not a bad idea," Samus allowed. She then turned to Gandrita. "As long as you can keep your flirting to a minimum. It won't help the story of Spike's running away from you every other minute." Gandrita rolled her eyes. "If you insist," she allowed. "It's good to see you well, by the way." "You too. Just don't turn into me this time." "Turn into you?" Twilight gasped in shock. Smirking, Gandrita stretched. Her body became extra translucent as she flared with pink electricity. When the light faded, she looked identical to Twilight Sparkle. "It's a peculiarity of my race," she explained in her own voice. "Since we're pure energy, we can reshape our bodies to mimic the appearance and abilities of anything we've encountered." "Sounds a lot like the changelings," Rainbow Dash pointed out as the alien shapeshifter resumed her own form. "Except they aren't pure energy," Twilight pointed out. She approached Gandrada. Could you do that again? But more slowly, so I can take some scans?" Gandrada chuckled. "Maybe later. First, I think some introductions are in order. Not to mention you're welcome to Ponyville party," Pinkie Pie proclaimed as she leapt up, confetti exploding around her. Gore stared at Pinkie as she raced around gathering party supplies. "Something tells me trying to understand her will give me a real headache." "It's Pinkie Pie," Twilight told him. "Don't question it. Trust me, don't. It's not worth the headaches. Besides, she's a good friend, even when she doesn't make any sense." "Now where's the fun in making sense?" Discord asked with a cackle as the large group went into the Crystal Tree Castle, laughing and talking as they waited for the party. "Gore!" Twilight shouted. "Don't cut chunks off my home!" "Apologies!" Chapter 46, Corruption, Olympus Part 1. The welcome party lasted the entire rest of the day, and Twilight was happy to put their new visitors up in her Crystal Castle/library home. By sunrise, however, she was ready to throw Gore out, as she couldn't leave him unsupervised in the library for more than 5 minutes before he started trying to collect samples again. While she was happy to meet someone who was so dedicated to study and learning from another world, it wasn't just the castle structure of living crystal that he tried to take study samples from. She tried to be understanding, since she could get the same way in her own studies, but she drew the line at waking up to find him brushing her mane while she slept with an attachment to his arm to collect dandruff samples. She did not have dandruff. Twilight wasn't the only one who looked like they didn't get much sleep the previous night. Rainbow and Applejack both looked hungover, and Rundus looked smug. At some point during the party, they had engaged in a drinking contest, which Rundus had won with ease. Rarity looked somewhat put out, claiming the loud noise from that contest had interrupted her beauty sleep, although her eyes were on Gandrada. Since Spike had shrunk down to be smaller than the Crusaders and hidden in amongst the roots of the chandelier, Twilight privately suspected Rarity's lack of sleep had been trying to keep Spike and the energy alien apart all night. Samus herself looked none the worse for the night of partying, and the Crusaders were happily eating their breakfast alongside Pinkie, Fluttershy, Celestia, and Luna. Discord hadn't stopped laughing the entire night, and didn't look like he needed any sleep. "So, will we begin telling the story now?" Gore asked curiously. "There is quite a bit to go over. 4 planets, 3 spaceships, and a grand finale," Rundus added mildly. "Should kill a few days," Gandrada agreed as she leaned back, arching her back as she stretched. Samus rolled her eyes. "Well, if everyone's ready." With nods all around, she continued. "It began with the summons to the Calander region of space, and the GFS Olympus, in orbit around planet Norian. Once the ship landed in the Olympus docking bay, Samus and Spike stepped off the ship, walking side by side towards the waiting GF soldiers. One of them greeted them warmly. "Samus, Spike, welcome aboard the flagship GFS Olympus. Admiral Dane is waiting for you in the briefing room. I will upload the location to you now." Both of them nodded in response as the coordinates of the briefing room were uploaded to their suits' map systems. As they progressed, Samus couldn't help but chuckle as Spike looked around eagerly, enjoying his reactions to his first time aboard a Federation battleship. To the right of the docking station was a target practice course, involving shooting a training drone as many times as you could in the air without letting it fall to the ground. Spike attempted it, but one burst of his breath melted the drone without launching it. Spike proceeded to pout all the way through the next door, only to get distracted by other things. As they progressed, they had to wait outside the contamination scanner, since Gore was going through the procedure ahead of them. "I must apologize for my rudeness that day," Gore spoke up at table. "I'd had a rough past few months, and it rubbed me the wrong way that the troops were treating me like a moron. I did design this body for myself after losing my original one, after all. I know my way around technology." "It's no problem," Samus replied with a shrug. "Pretty sure we were all under a bit of stress that day." "Not all," Rundus growled, glowering at Gandrada, who merely rolled her eyes. Samus shook her head. "At any rate, nothing really interesting there, except when it was Spike's turn in the scanner." "What do you mean there's a problem?" Samus demanded of the techs as Spike stood patiently in the chamber. "We can't seem to scan him," the tech replied. "All the data coming from the scanners makes no sense. It's claiming there's some sort of gravimetric distortion in his body, and that's impossible." Samus took a closer look at the scans. "Oh! So that's how it works?" "Excuse me?" the tech demanded. "Spike's adapted for a 20G planet," Samus explained. "His armor's designed to limit his physical capabilities in lower G environments so he doesn't break things, or people, accidentally. That's what you're picking up." After that, Spike was cleared for the command bridge rather quickly, with the techs gaping at him. Smirking, he idly flexed his arm, making them duck under their consoles. "I gotta admit," Spike called from his perch in the chandelier, "I probably had too much fun with that." Several of the listeners chuckled, though it turned to genuine laughter when Gandrada sent him a flirtatious smirk that had him hiding in the chandelier again. "Gandrada," Samus chided gently. "I can't help it," she replied. "He's just too adorable." Rolling her eyes, Samus continued her tale. As Samus and Spike entered the command bridge, they found several people waiting for them. Admiral Dane was a middle-aged soldier in full uniform, with a no-nonsense air about him. Lined up alongside where Samus and Spike had walked in were Rundus, Gore, and Samus? "Gandrada, enough!" Admiral Dane barked as Rundus and Gore glanced back and forth between the two Samuses in confusion. The one to the far right reverted to Gandrada in a flash of light as she giggled. Spike, for his part, chuckled as well, shooting Gandrada a thumbs up behind the backs of the other hunters. Catching sight of it, Gandrada smiled and sent him a wink. Admiral Dane began the debriefing. "Looks like everyone's here now," he stated bluntly. "Before I begin the briefing, let me introduce 242, the flagship's Aurora unit." "Aurora unit?" Twilight asked curiously. "Biological supercomputers," Gore explained. "They are based off living brains, and can thus process data in ways simple electronics cannot handle, even making intuitive leaps of logic. The biological component actually proved an unexpected advantage, as the system was able to react to damage in ways above and beyond simple status reports, able to act to preserve ship and crew beyond what a standard computer could do." "All well and good," Samus grumbled, "but they gave me the creeps. Reminded me too much of Mother Brain." "Mother Brain?" Celestia inquired. "The Space Pirates Bio supercomputer," Samus explained. "A giant brain that controlled everything with powerful telepathic abilities. Not pleasant. Fought the thing on ZB shortly before I found Spike's egg." "Can we skip over the actual briefing?" Spike asked plaintively. "It was rather boring. Couldn't we just sum up the highlights?" "Well, the Aurora network was down due to viral infection," Gandrada explained quickly. "A vaccine had been developed, but it needed to be administered to each Aurora unit in person, but the virus was space pirate origin, due to them having captured another vessel, the GFS Valhalla, and its Aurora unit. Since the feds were worried about further pirate attack, they called in hunters with records of thwarting the pirates to do it. That was us." Succinct and to the point, Gore complimented. "I didn't know you could be so efficient." "We were also to investigate pirate activity in the area while we did so," Samus added. "Of course, the need for that was quickly discarded when the pirates attacked the Olympus and planet Norian." Chapter 47, Corruption, Olympus Part 2. "The pirates attacked the Olympus?" Twilight gasped in shock. "Actually, they were attacking Norian," Samus clarified. "They were after the planetary defense system." "Why would they want to break that?" Rainbow asked curiously. "Well, we didn't know it at the time," Samus began, "but..." She paused as she noticed Pinky reaching around in her mane, only to become confused. She then ducked under the table. When she came back out, she was holding her spoilers. Sinon looking rather put out about something, and could be barely heard to be muttering about Spartans and robot ponies. The space pirates were working for Dark Samus, and had accessed the source of Phazon and were trying to crash a Phazon meteorite into Norian, amongst other worlds, Gore explained. Of course, we didn't get the full details of that for quite some time. Nor were we able to do much about it, Rundus admitted, lowering his head. I'd say we did okay as far as Norian was concerned, Gandrada countered. At any rate, Samus continued, Rundus, Gore, and Gandrada were ordered immediately to the planet's surface to assist the ground troops. While Spike and I had the same orders, we decided to make sure everything was more or less stable in orbit in the Olympus before heading for the surface. As Samus and Spike made their way back to the docking bay, they bore witness to a single massive energy blast disabling another warship through a view screen. Continuing on, they spotted pirate militia troops attacking some of the techs. While they were able to take out the Milita, they had already killed the techs. Also, the fighting had led to the security doors locking shut, forcing Samus and Spike to take an alternate route. On the way, a pirate boarding craft slammed into the side of the ship. Pirate troops poured out, but were quickly taken down by both Samus' power beam and Spike's flame breath, keeping the few troops in the hall alive. In the next hallway, another trooper was pinned down by pirate automatons, which fell rapidly to the pair's joint assault. Spike tossed the trooper a med pack as they raced by. In the next hallway, a fighter crashed into the side of the ship, creating a vacuum that sucked several pirates out. Seeing two of the troops being pulled towards the opening, Spike leapt forward. He managed to catch the first troop in one claw as he sank the other claw onto the floor, his tail snaking out to grab the other trooper just before he was pulled out. Some quick thinking on Samus' part triggered the shutters to seal the breach, giving Spike just enough time to pull his tail back before it was cut off. Both troops clung to the hull as they caught their breath. Turning back to seek another path, they encountered a swarm of pirates, who managed to pull an energy cell from its housing, disabling several security measures. Unfortunately for the pirates, while Samus had lost most of her weaponry from previous adventures, Spike's breath had lost none of its potency. The scent of cooked pirate quickly filled the passageway, making Spike gag and Samus glad her suit purified any air it absorbed from the environment. The retelling was paused as several of the gathered audience members gagged. Did you have tail that part? Applejack gasped out desperately. Samus scratched her chin. Probably not. Yes, Spike growled. Ugh, this helm needs an air freshener attachment or something. Now I know why you were so happy after saving me, Rundus commented. We'll explain when we get to that part of the story, Samus stated quickly as she saw every pony turn towards her with curious faces, and one sign waved like a bludgeon. At any rate, putting the energy cell back in its socket restored power to the room, which, much to Spike's appreciation, also activated the air circulation system, which rapidly purged the stench of the dead pirates. Unfortunately, it also heralded the approach of numerous explosive automatons. Samus was able to escape by way of air vents in her morph ball, while Spike took the path the pirates had blasted inward to escape. My route involved me taking a brief detour outside the ship, as well as regaining my missile launcher from the ship's armory, Samus explained. Mine involved a detour through the ship's mess hall, Spike explained. Which was even more of a mess thanks to the pirates' attack. There wasn't even anything left worth eating, except that bento Gandrade had hidden away for me on her way through. As several pairs of eyes turned to her, Gandrade chuckled and shrugged. What? I was on that route myself, and boys of any race are always hungry. When he shot me the thumbs up over my pretending to be Samus, he piqued my interest, and I figured leaving a meal for him would earn me some points if you were looking. The thought would have been more appreciated if you hadn't cut the weenies into miniature hearts and images of you, Spike pointed out from his hiding spot in the chandelier. Aw, didn't you like eating little old me? Gandrada asked teasingly. Can we skip to the Berserker Lord? Spike pleaded. Berserker Lord? Several ponies asked. A new mainstay of the pirate forces, Samus explained. large and bulky, with crystallized phase-in armor and launching phase-in-based projectiles. Best way to fight it was to hit its own projectiles back at it with charged shots or, in Spike's case, breath attacks. One of them caught up to us at the ship, Spike continued. As the Berserker Lord stomped up, Samus sent the commander a ship to get out of range of the fight. The Berserker Lord's primary attacks involved spraying liquid phase-in from its mouth and phase-in-based lasers. Spike and Samus started the battle by focusing on the Lord's shoulders, where they could tell the armor was weaker. They each took one shoulder to speed the fight up. Once it had taken enough damage, it started launching the phase-in spheres, which Samus and Spike shot back. After 4 shots were reflected that way, the armor plating broke off, and Spike lunged in, digging his claws into the exposed flesh, tearing it to shreds. The Lord did not remain standing for long, especially after he dug a big enough hole to fire a blast of flame straight into its brain. "Impressive," Rundus commented, nodding to Spike. "You've done well incorporating your instinctive side into educated combat," Gore praised. "Few can manage that. Wish I'd seen more of you fighting if you fight like that," Gandrada purred. "Rawr!" Samus sighed. "After that, we took the ship down to Norian, and I'll tell you about that just as soon as I get Spike out of the chandelier." "So, did Spike master size changing as a way to hide from Gandrada?" Rainbow Dash joked as Samus went in amongst the roots in her morph ball. Laughter and Gandrada's pout greeting it. Chapter 48, Corruption, Norian 1. Once Samus had managed to coax Spike out of hiding to sit at the table, accomplished by having Twilight and Rarity magically bind Gandrada to her chair, which was moved to the opposite end of the table amongst the CMC with Discord hovering over her, everyone was ready to hear more of the story. "In answer to your question, Rainbow, no I didn't," Spike explained. "Though I did master it partially because of her." Gandrada purred. "You most certainly." Discord promptly swatted Gandrada's nose with a rolled up copy of the full free press. "Bad dog," he scolded. "No biscuit." When Rundus finally stopped laughing, Samus continued the story. "At any rate, we headed down for Norian to deal with the pirates there." As the ship glided into landing on Norian, Spike spied Ridley in the distance. "So he's back," he muttered under his breath. "I guess it's time for a rematch." "Be careful," Samus chided. "He's probably been training since your last encounter specifically for fighting you." Spike chuckled and flashed her a smirk. "He's not the only one," he pointed out, gesturing to the well-used VR trainer in the back of the ship. "VR trainer?" Rainbow and Twilight both asked curiously. "Interstellar flight tends to be very long, even with hyperlight travel," Samus explained. "Before finding Spike, I would alternate the time between planets between cryosleep and using the VR trainer to keep me physically fit. It basically creates a fight simulation in the mind, while using electrical stimulation in response to the simulation so the body experiences the strain and intensity of the training." "Wait, you mean it's an exercise you can get while napping?" Rainbow asked eagerly, making Twilight face hoof. "Basically," Samus chuckled. "Spike had been using it since Talon 4 to train against the simulation of Ridley in all sorts of environments. I suggested he train against other opponents, but he claimed Ridley would always give him the greatest challenge, and I had a lot of data on him to build the simulation. So I knew I was ready for Ridley when I went after him in the skies of Norian, while Mom went after the generators," Spike explained. As Spike flew into battle, he saw Ridley had changed his strategy. He wasn't heavily armored as he had been before. However, his scales had been chemically altered to amplify their defensive attribute, taking on a strong blue tinge. Spike assumed that Ridley had experimented with phase-in augmentation the same way the other pirates seemed to have. He was certain, however, that he was more than a match for the beast. He roared his challenge. Ridley turned away from assaulting one of the generators for the planetary defense system at the sound, and roared a challenge back. He immediately lunged through the air for the younger dragon. Spike knew a direct assault wouldn't be a good idea. His armor was restricting his power output to take the planet's lower gravity, only 10 Gs, into account, while Ridley was still flying at his peak. Locking claws or teeth wouldn't be a good idea unless he disengaged his armor's limiters, and then he might do more damage to the place than Ridley. However, the environment itself proved an advantage. Rather than clashing with Ridley directly, he led the old worm to chase him, weaving in and out of the buildings. Ridley pursued him with alacrity, plainly determined to destroy the younger Drake, blind to everything around them. When Spike dodged around a pirate transport craft, Ridley blasted right through it, destroying the craft and its passengers. Ridley attempted the same with the buildings at first, but the lack of success and headaches made him decide to do otherwise. Once he knew Ridley was following his path exactly, too close for breath attacks, since Spike could easily dodge, he put his plan into action. Flying over one of the bridges between buildings, he immediately dove down the other side, coming back under it. Ridley followed his path exactly, but Spike had just enough lead to catch hold of the end of Ridley's tail, catching him where he couldn't easily turn around to face him. Taking advantage, he dug into the lower half of Ridley's body with claws, fangs, and breath, trying to do as much damage as he could. Ridley eventually managed to break free, and Spike had to give up a good amount of altitude to evade his counterattack, though he didn't come away unscathed. His readouts indicated the energy shields of his armor were down about 20%. He'd pushed the attack too long, and it wouldn't be so easy to lead Ridley into another such attack, which is why he didn't intend to. Knowing Ridley would be more cautious in the bridge areas, Spike found the one he was looking for and flew through it. As expected, Ridley was slower in his approach of it, expecting Spike to pull the same trick as before. As a result, Ridley made himself a perfect target for the PED Delta Marine Squad, who happily blasted away at him with their phase-enhanced weapons. PED Squad? Celestia asked curiously. Phase-enhanced weapons? Luna's voice showed her distaste for the very idea. With how much the pirates were making use of phase-in, the Federation had to respond in kind or be completely overwhelmed, Gore explained. However, seeing the harm phase-in could work when exposed directly to organic beings, they instead designed power suits that contained a phase-in reserve that could be used to temporarily turbocharge weapons and armor until the system was disengaged or the phase-in reserve ran out. This was the PED, phase-in enhancement device, suits. And as I'd thought, the blue color of Ridley's scales was from phase-in enhancement, and phase-in based weaponry like the hyper mode of a PED tore right through his scales, Spike explained eagerly. While he was roaring in pain and getting ready to counterattack, I flew up between him and the Marines, doing a flyby attack with claws and breath on the areas his scales had been weakened. Of course, Ridley immediately turned to follow me, which meant he took a full salvo of phase-in enhanced rounds to his back and wings, knocking him out of the sky. Run is finished. I saw the end of that battle on my way back from Generator C to check on how Samus was doing at Generator B, since she'd already activated Generator A. He held out his closed fist. Smiling, Spike returned the fist bump. I admit, I was proud of that strategy. As well you should, Luna praised. Of course, there wasn't much time to celebrate, Samus explained. Not only was Ridley not down for the count, we had to deal with him again later, but a massive meteorite filled with phase-in, what we'd later learn was a Leviathan seed, as we've explained, had come out of a rift in space, and was on a collision course with the planet. We all met up at the elevator to the controls, Gandrada explained. We needed to activate the defense cannons right away. Our decision proved to be tactically unsound, Gore admitted. As Spike came racing into the elevator, he found Samus, Rundus, Gore in a larger battle body, and Gandrada waiting for him. He immediately noticed the new upgrade on Samus' left arm, a new modification for the grapple beam his scanners identified as the grapple lasso, which could be used to latch onto objects for the purpose of yanking them from their moorings. Nice flying, Spike, Rundus complimented. Saw you kick that other dragon's ass. I witnessed it myself through the security cameras, Gore added in a much gruffer voice than normal as the elevator started moving. I admit, I had my doubts about your abilities, but no longer. Not bad at all, big boy, Gandrada purred. Spike chuckled nervously at all the praise, but couldn't help but preen as Samus threw him a silent thumbs up. Once the elevator stopped, the group rushed out to activate the planetary defense cannons, but when they weren't looking, Dark Samus charged in a blast of phase-in, and surrounded by a phase-in energy shield. The group immediately leapt to the attack, but each of them was felled one by a well-placed phase shot near the center of their bodies. Spike was the only one who'd had the sense to finish powering up the defense cannon before charging to the fight. As a result, Dark Samus' assault did not doom the planet, but it did have long-reaching effects for the hunters. Chapter 49, Corruption. What happened? Twilight asked worriedly. From the sound of it, killing you wasn't Dark Samus' intent, and that's worrisome. Agreed, Rundus confirmed. What actually happened was that Dark Samus planted a phase seed inside each of us, close to our cores, where it would be difficult to extract or purge. The seed then started pumping low levels of phase-in into our systems. Long term, that would have been bad, Gandrada explained. But in the short term, the Fed scientists saw it as an opportunity, by equipping each of us with modified PED suits, designed to draw from the phase in our bodies now naturally generated to power them. But wouldn't that just accelerate the rate at which the phase-in corrupted your body? Rainbow asked in confusion. Like with the pirate phase-in elites? The hunters all stared at the prismatic Pegasus for a time. Gore was the first to speak up. Correct me if I'm wrong, Spike, but isn't the purple one the genius of the group? Each of them has their own genius, actually, Spike corrected. But you're right that Rainbow tends to prefer action over book learning. Why? I'm just wondering how she caught what the Federation scientists miss when this world's science is nearly a millennium behind, Gore clarified. To make a long story short, Rainbow, Rundus continued before she could parse a sentence enough to take offense, that's exactly what happened to myself, Gore, and Gandrada, and probably was Dark Samus' plan all along. But she didn't account for Spike, Gandrada clarified with a smirk. Why? Twilight asked. What happened to him? I know his body automatically metabolizes phase-in. Spike chuckled. This mission is where my breath started working like Mom's arm cannon. Seeing even more confused expressions, Samus waved her hand to gather attention. Let me explain. See, after the hit, Rundus, Gore, and Gandrada all regained consciousness within a week. Spike woke up around the same time, but stayed on board the Olympus to wait for me to wake up. Mostly because they wouldn't let him take your ship out without a pilot's license, Rundus teased, getting a dragon raspberry blown his way, startling laughter from many of the listeners. Samus smiled as she continued. For me, however, it took a full month to wake up. And after getting an explanation of how my new PED suit enabled a hyper mode function by injecting an energy tank, as well as testing it out, I got some answers about what it had done to Spike. So is Spike now generating his own phase-in, too? Samus asked the tech as she was let out of the lab. Not, exactly, the tech replied nervously. As best as we can tell based on the reports we've received about his past physical examinations from Ceres, he's developed a new gland. A new gland? Samus asked. What, in his gut or something? No, amongst his flame sacs, the tech clarified. The exact nature through which he generates his flame still isn't completely analyzed, but all the glands and organs involved had already been identified. There's a new gland connected to the system, and it uses energy to convert his flame into something else. Something else? Samus asked. Stop beating around the bush and tell it to me straight. Shrugging, the tech gestured to a vid screen. A video file played, showing Spike facing up against a pillar energized by phase-in. In the screen, Spike took a deep breath and opened his mouth wide. A flowing blue and white stream similar to Samus' own charged phase-in beam erupted from his mouth, tearing through the phase-in in the column as though it were made of tissue paper. It deflected off the wall behind the pillar with no damage, however. That wasn't phase-in, Samus pointed out. No, the tech agreed. Phase-in energy would have torn right through the far wall, too, at those energy levels. From what we've been able to determine, however, it's an energy that functions similarly to the energy harvested from processed phase-in, but on the opposite wavelength. From what we've been able to determine, it has an antithetical nature to phase-in and anything making use of phase-in energy. We take into referring to this new energy, and the gland that produces it, as phase-it. Samus nodded carefully as she took this all in. So, what exactly does this phase-it do? As we've noted, it has an antithetical effect on phazon and phazon users, the tech explained. When used against a material composed of phazon, it will tear right through it, destroying its molecular structure. It will have a similar effect on any organic lifeform actively using phazon, like through the hypermode of a pet of Federation or Pirate origin. "I'll make sure not to stand in front of him, then," Samus muttered dryly. "You only need to worry about it if you're actively in hypermode," the tech clarified. "At any other time, the phazon will have no effect on your power suit." "Good to know," Samus allowed, "but I'm still not standing in front of him until I'm not generating phazon anymore." After that, I was reunited with Spike, and we went to get a mission briefing from the ship's Aurora unit, Samus concluded. "So, what was Spike doing for the 3 weeks he was awake and you weren't?" Pinky asked curiously. "Researching the condition," Spike explained. "At first in the hope of fixing Mom, but as we lost contact with Rundus, Gore, and Gandrada, to figure out exactly how it worked. And a good thing I did! That knowledge saved their lives!" Chapter 50, Corruption, New Mission. "Save their lives?" Cadence asked worriedly. "You mean, the phazon was going to?" "Yup," Spike replied. "As best as I was able to determine, Dark Samus planted the phazon seeds in us in the hopes of harvesting them after we were fully corrupted, absorbing our unique ability sets into her own and eliminating the greatest threat to her goals in one fell swoop." "She was perturbed that Spike thwarted her," Gore stated mildly. "That's an understatement," Rundus and Gandrada chimed in together. The way they glared at each other afterwards made Shining Armor, amongst others, chuckle. "At any rate," Samus continued, "we went to the Aurora unit for our mission briefing." Reaching the Aurora chamber, Samus activated the interface to speak with the unit. "Welcome Samus and Spike Aaron," the Aurora unit intoned. "Let us begin. Time is most critical. During the attempted pirate invasion of Norian, it was confirmed that 2 nearby planets were similarly attacked. These planets are named Bryo and Elysia. These Leviathans have impacted and embedded themselves deep into each planet, spreading a virulent phazon inside their bodies. The Leviathans must be destroyed. As Spike has been informed, Rundus was dispatched to Bryo and Gore to Elysia on that exact mission, while Gandrada was dispatched to find the pirate stronghold. This was 2 weeks ago, and we lost contact with them 7 days ago. They were also outfitted with ped suits like yours to take advantage of the phazon their bodies were generating. Your mission now is to complete their missions and find out what happened to them, and take whatever action you deem necessary in the process. As Bryo is closest, it is your first objective. Good luck!" With the briefing complete, Samus and Spike immediately made for their ship. "So what was Bryo like?" Luna asked curiously. "Unpleasant," Rundus replied. "Equal parts barren stone, ruined citadels, and overgrown jungle. The once proud natives had been reduced to feral madness." "Natives?" Twilight asked in surprise. "The Bryonians were actually once allies of the Chozo," Samus explained. "However, unlike the Chozo, they didn't learn the proper balance between technological advancement and attunement with nature, and it destroyed them. It led to civil war between the Lords of Science and the Shamans, with the regular citizenry divided between them, and sometimes even being turned into weapons by each. In the end, the last Lord of Science found balance by combining science with the nature magic of their race, and his only shaman disciple went out into the wilderness after his death to inscribe the records of what had happened, and attempt to turn what was left of their people back from howling barbarism. She succeeded in the first, we have no idea how successful she was in the latter." Silence surrounded the table as they all took this in. Even Discord hung his head in respect for the fallen. Spike was the first to break the silence. "It wasn't all bad, though," he mentioned. "At least, not for me. See, the entirety of the part of the planet we were exploring regarding the Leviathan was tropical, and almost entirely open air. Rainbow, Scootaloo, Celestia, Luna, and Cadence all smirked at that, with Rainbow and Cadence holding their hooves up to bump Spike's clenched claws. As they came in for a landing on Bryo, Samus and Spike noticed that the Leviathan was surrounded by a force shield of space pirate design. On instructions from the Aurora unit, they sought out a downed Federation ship to reactivate its satellite uplink in hopes of getting more information. Spike took to the air, intending to get an aerial survey of the areas available to explore, plot a course to the downed ship, and grab whatever useful items he could for Samus. This included several missile expansions and energy tanks. As Samus moved along an interior path, she encountered a great deal of evidence of Rundus movements. Several unnatural ice formations throughout the area, some encasing formerly hostile organic creatures, showed his progress. A rather large ice bridge was evidence that he was expecting someone without his abilities to come after him, and sought to leave a path for them. She took that as a good sign. The central area of the first segment of Bryo was a massive structure somewhat resembling Chozo ruins, but without the natural flow of stone and metal reminiscent of growing things that marked Chozo work. For some reason, it made Samus feel uneasy to see a city so similar and yet so different from that which she grew up in. After dealing with many hostile creatures, some new, and some similar to varieties she'd encountered on other worlds, Samus reached a point where the path was blocked by phazon vines. There were phazon concentrations that could be destroyed with phazon-based weaponry to open the path. Entering Hyper Mode, Samus did so. Shortly after, Samus would have faced off against Reptilicus hunters, phazon-mutated ground-based predators of Bryo that resembled six-limbed velociraptors. However, Bryo had few high-altitude flyers, and the Reptilicus had no reason to expect attack from an aerial creature, as there were none larger than them. This made them easy prey for Spike, who took the first one out with a dropped boulder, the second with his flame breath, and the third with his claws. A hidden alcove granted Samus a grapple swing upgrade, which restored the grapple beam's original function of swinging from grapple points. This allowed Samus to follow the path Spike had plotted to the crashed ship, the GFS Theseus. Due to the damage the ship had taken in crashing, there were no entrances to the control station large enough for Spike, so he'd been forced to wait for Samus to arrive. It didn't take Samus long to restart the uplink, and she and Spike then waited for information from the Aurora unit on where to go and what to do next. The satellite data gave us the location of two shield generators of pirate construction, Samus explained. At first, Spike was all for trying to fly in and destroy them, but satellite mapping revealed that the pirates had added anti-air turrets specifically designed to target small, high-speed flyers. Rainbow snickered. The pirates designed anti-Spike turrets? Spike smirked in pride. Yup. So we had to go in another way, Samus explained. Thankfully, the data also included two other landing points for the ship. On the way out, we spotted Rundus in the distance, but... Spike glanced towards Rundus. At that point, the phazon corruption was already quite strong, Rundus explained. I feared I would injure them if I got too close and lost control. Noticing Samus, Spike, Gore, and Gandrata's firm gazes, he quailed. Alright, I was also too prideful to admit I'd failed my mission. This admission brought more than a few snickers from those around the table, as well as a gentle pat on the side from Applejack. Chapter 51, Corruption, Fire and Ice. As Pinkie Pie brought everyone some refreshments, Samus continued her tale of their explorations of Bryo. On the way back to the ship to check out those new landing coordinates, I had to deal with some alpha hoppers, she explained. The bulbous bastards were tough. I had to switch to hyper mode to take them down. Why not just call in Spike for an air strike? Scootaloo asked curiously. It was on that ice bridge I mentioned earlier, Samus replied coolly. I didn't want to risk it breaking from impact of flames. Valid point, Rainbow agreed. You don't have wings? Samus nodded, ignoring Gandrata's chuckle. At any rate, the first place we headed with the ship was the Fiery Air Dock, in the Bryo Fire region. The Bryo Fire region was aptly named. The entire region had a much higher temperature than elsewhere due to the high quantities of fuel gel that flowed freely throughout the region. In point of fact, most of the region was a factory designed to harvest the fuel gel, though Samus couldn't be entirely certain if it had been built by the Bryonians, the Federation, or the pirates. It showed signs of having been used by both of the latter, at any rate. Spike's main concern at first, though, had been the discovery that the majority of the area was inside the factory, with very few points he could see where he could gain aerial access. This left him with the choice of being absent for most of the exploration or not flying. Grumbling to himself, he decided to opt for the latter, hoping he wouldn't have to deal with too many morph ball tunnels. After all, unlike Magmore Caverns back on Talon 4 where he could swim in the lava, his hide was not immune to the caustic effects of fuel gel. Another thing the pair noticed that drew their attention was Runda's ship, which was also docked in midair on an ice platform nearby. "Rundus is here," Spike murmured. "Or at least, somewhere on the planet. He's as versatile as I am in the air. More so, since he can use smaller doors," Samus teased, earning her a half-hearted glare from her draconian son. Taking another look through her scanners, she frowned. "The engines are still warm." "Then he's somewhere nearby," Spike replied, steeling himself for the worst he could imagine. As they explored inside the facility, Spike's flame breath was both useful and dangerous. While it could ignite some streams of fuel gel in order to activate various devices, if he didn't aim carefully, he ran the risk of igniting pools of fuel gel with explosive results. Unfortunately for Spike, a morph ball tunnel was almost immediately the only way forward, forcing him to backtrack and hope he could catch up with Samus sooner rather than later. "This was rather unfortunate for me as well," Samus murmured. "If Spike had been able to be with me at a certain point, things might have gone much smoother." "Sorry about that, Mom," Spike murmured softly. "Not your fault," she hastened to reassure him. "Besides, it all worked out in the end." "What happened?" Twilight asked worriedly. Samus sighed. "I found out what had happened to Rundus and the others." Finding more phase and base vines blocking her path at one point, Samus calmly switched to hyper mode and blasted them away with her phase and beam. However, just as the last phase and node burst, her suit system started going haywire, and she felt a sudden pain in her gut. The ped started overclocking, and her suit registered a phase and overcharge, as well as an emergency message to vent the phase and via her arm cannon. Pumping out all the phase and currently in the ped, difficult, since it was constantly replenishing, Samus managed to force herself out of hyper mode by triggering the ped's forced cooldown function. She received an immediate message from the Aurora unit that an abnormality in her suit's life support had been detected. "Well, isn't that the understatement of the year?" she thought grumpily as the message continued on, indicating that the data had been downloaded for analysis. "I got the message about her suit, too," Spike spoke up. "If she hadn't immediately messaged me that she was fine, I'd have probably ripped the facility apart to get to her." "I'd have paid to see that," Rundus joked. Rolling her eyes as several ponies around the table giggled, Samus moved on. "At any rate, I was able to catch up to Spike later on." As Samus entered an open air area, Spike swooped down from above for a landing. "You sure you're okay, Mom?" he asked worriedly. Samus managed to shrug. "I'll live," she replied. "And I can keep going? Beyond that, let's wait and see what the Aurora unit has to say." Spike nodded slowly, plainly still worried. "Still going to stick close to you," he affirmed. "Just to be on the safe side." Samus chuckled as she rolled her eyes. "Whatever you say," she replied jokingly. Not long after that, the pair came to a rather large open-air area, and immediately came under attack by space pirate bombardment. Spike immediately took to the air, taking out the pirate assault before it could get too close to Samus, while Samus herself focused on whatever pirate troops managed to get past Spike. Midway through the assault, however, the pirates came under attack from another source, as massive spires of ice erupted out of nowhere and rained down from the sky to tear them apart. "Aw yeah!" Rainbow crowed, pumping her hoof. "And the ice dude saves the day." Rundus lowered his head. "Not exactly." When all eyes turned to him, he sighed. "At that point, I'd all but lost the battle with the phase and corruption in my body. I sought out Samus and Spike at that point, hoping they could stop me before I turned, or was turned, against innocence." "You mean?" Twilight began in a horrified tone. "You were there looking to be put down," Shining Armor stated in a flat tone, neither hostile nor compassionate, but still somehow understanding. "Yes," Rundus agreed. I thought it was the only solution. Thankfully, Spike had come up with another. Spike grinned as all eyes turned to him. Remember what I said about having studied the phase-in infections in the others? Well, in Runda's case, his physiology is a mix of flesh and living ice, and the phase-in seed inside him had embedded itself in a large ice crystal near his heart. I'd reconfigured my scanners with that data, just in case we encountered Rundus Umbraio, and my scans showed that, despite the phase-in corruption having spread through most of his body, it was still sustained by the seed, in much the same way the phase-in of a planet was sustained by the core inside the Leviathan. Remove the seed, the phase-in in the rest of the body dissipates. At least, that was the theory. And so you put the theory to the test? Twilight inquired with a proud smile. Once we'd managed to get Rundus to hold still long enough, Spike replied. With how close the ice crystal with the phase-in seed was to his heart, I didn't want to miss. The first focus of the battle with Rundus for Samus and Spike was to do enough damage to him to daze him so his ice armor could be torn off. This was made somewhat difficult by the series of ice pillars he'd erected in the area, and the fact that he'd roofed the entire area in ice, seriously hampering both allied hunters' maneuverability. Thankfully, Spike's flame breath under control was very effective at dazing Rundus, as his icy nature made him especially susceptible to the heat. Once Rundus was dazed, Samus immediately leapt forward to tear the ice armor off with her grapple lasso. Rundus immediately snapped out of his daze and began attacking again while racing about. Samus continued her assault, while Spike pursued, trying to find his moment to strike. His moment came as Rundus paused to reform his ice armor. Lunging forward, Spike plunged his claw into Rundus' chest. Relying on his sense of touch and awareness of phase-in, he managed to find the crystal with the phase-in seed. Grasping it, he tore it from Rundus' torso. As Rundus fell backwards to the ground, his ped falling apart, Spike immediately swallowed the crystal to digest the phase-in seed. Samus stared in shock, then quickly switched to her scan visor. To her surprise, Spike's assault had, indeed, cleansed Rundus of all phase-in corruption. However, he was now dying of the wound. As she swung back to Spike, her scans displayed an alert. New adaptation detected in Spike's flame sac region. Analyzing. Before the analysis had completed, Spike opened his mouth and exhaled. A blast of super chilled air shot into the hole in Rundus' chest, sealing it in ice. Analysis complete. Spike now has a gland amongst his flame sacs to generate and store freon and other similar gases in liquid form to generate a super cold breath weapon, capable of freezing the surroundings in a manner similar to Rundus' own abilities. Spike has acquired ice breath. Adaptation has been analyzed and applied to your missile system, as it is incompatible with your beam weapon and current suit configuration. Ice missile acquired. Samus leaned back, a proud smile on her face. Well, that was unexpected, she murmured. Rundus stared up at Spike as his hand went to the icy seal. I'm alive? And uncorrupted? Barely, Spike commented dryly. I suggest you get back to your ship and hightail it for the Olympus for a more thorough medical checkup. In the middle of his statement, Spike's head snapped up and he spun around. A ghostly apparition of Dark Samus floated in the air as the ice dome faded away, seeming to snarl and rage at Spike. Spike growled deep in his throat, opened his mouth wide, and released a phase-it blast. Dark Samus wasn't able to dodge all of it, as it hadn't expected an attack that could hurt it in that form, and was forced to flee. Rundus stared up at what had just happened. I think I'll take your advice, he murmured. Managing to get himself to his feet, he placed his hand on Spike's shoulder. I won't forget this. And I didn't, Rundus concluded, raising his hand to where the ice patch remained as a seeming discoloration of his flesh. Especially since, seeing how weak I was, Spike insisted on flying me back to my ship. Well, I wasn't exactly doing well in all that heat, anyway. Chapter 52, Corruption, First Generator. So what did you do after returning to your ship? Luna inquired of Rundus. I took the advice and went up into space, sending the Olympus a mayday, Rundus replied. It wasn't long after that I was picked up and they began medical treatment, as well as trying to study what happened to me. He couldn't suppress his chuckle. I say trying because they couldn't find any trace of phasing in my system to study what effect it had on me. "I'm just that good," Spike preened. While Spike was taking Rundus back to his ship, I moved on, Samus explained. The new ice missiles proved quite useful. Not only could I freeze enemies and other obstacles, but one fired into fuel gel provided a temporary ice platform I could jump on. It could even freeze flowing fuel gel, turning a pouring gel waterfall into a frozen platform to jump across. She chuckled at the sight of Rainbow taking assiduous notes. "Still planning on making that video game?" "Yup," Rainbow agreed. "I'm going to make a mint." "Oh, I love mints," Pinky called happily. "They taste so good on my tongue and make my breath so chilly fresh." Chuckling, Samus moved on. I managed to get a scan of the Space Pirate Shield generator, but none of my weapons were tough enough to damage it. Based on my scans, even Spike's arsenal wouldn't have damaged it. The Aurora unit indicated I'd need to find some new sort of armament. "So we went back to the main area of Bryo," Spike explained. "With ice weaponry, more paths were available. And, since I had to take it easy carrying Rundus, we actually made it back to the ship at about the same time." Once back in the northern area of Bryo, Spike and Samus made their way towards a path beyond the crashed frigate they had been unable to pursue before, which their ice weaponry now made viable. On their way there, the Aurora unit informed them that along said path was a Federation landing site, where they would be able to upgrade their ship. They also received a message about the malfunction in the PED. Apparently, the stimulation of the unique phasing inside Samus by the PED caused it to go into overproduction. The Aurora unit offered the Federation's apologies for not foreseeing the possibility. Spike, Rundus, Gore, and Gandreda all snorted. "Well, that's what they said," Samus complained defensively. Reaching the landing site they were told about, Samus and Spike looked around to see what they needed to do to get the ship in. However, just as Samus found the controls, an alert began. The whole site closed itself down as several of the Bryonian creatures attacked them. Samus and Spike, as was their habit in these situations, went back to back at first until they could identify all threats, then split apart to take the enemies out in a pincer attack. Between Samus' new ice missiles and Spike's ice breath, it was relatively easy to freeze most of the enemies, after which Spike charged through them to smash them to bits. Once all the enemies were destroyed, the controls became available again. Since all paths to the controls for the Skylight were through morph ball tunnels and the ventilation system, Spike stayed at the controls for the ship upgrade system, ready to act once the ship was in place. As she went, Samus collected an energy cell that she thought might prove useful later. This also disengaged the system it was powering, causing a force field to drop, revealing a new path which required heat-based weaponry to open. Samus made a mental note of it, deciding to explore it later after upgrading her ship and dealing with the Leviathan. Once Samus had the bay doors opened, Spike lowered the platforms to clear the pad. Samus then called the ship to land with her command visor, allowing Spike to trigger the upgrade. The ship missiles it provided proved to be exactly what they needed to destroy the shield generators. The ship missiles weren't just useful for dealing with the generators, Samus explained. Not only were there other obstacles that could be destroyed with them, the ship could also be called in to deliver an aerial bombardment on any enemies we were dealing with, as long as we were in open air and not somewhere protected by anti-air artillery. "Sounds like it would have been more efficient to give Spike power bombs," Rainbow pointed out as she looked up from her notes. Samus rolled her eyes as Spike chuckled. "Possibly," she allowed. "But it was still useful in a lot of situations. And it certainly looked amazing." Since there weren't any anti-Spike artillery platforms set up in Bryo Fire, Spike decided that the most efficient way of destroying the generator in that area was to fly Samus there on his back, get into position where she could lock onto the generator with her command visor, and order the bombardment. They could then meet up with the ship in midair, board, and head for the next region of Bryo to go after the other generator. The strategy proved quite effective, though Samus insisted on Spike roosting somewhere sturdy before she called in the gunship. Once braced above where Samus had gotten the generator scan in the first place, she attempted to call in the ship, only to find the signal blocked. Tracking the source of the interference, they found a pirate jamming station where they'd fought Rundus. Before Samus could give any instructions, Spike dove like a meteorite, seized an armored paratrooper, and smashed it into the jamming station. Samus followed up with several ice missiles just before Spike unleashed his flame breath. The resulting temperature variance caused the station to crack as the metal weakened. With the signal interrupted, Samus called in the gunship as Spike took to the air. The ship swept in, launching its barrage of missiles. The heavy impacts and explosives obliterated the pirate equipment. The explosion when the same missiles slammed into the shield generator, however, was much more satisfying to watch. After that, Samus continued, we had to head for the western portion of Bryo for the other generator. Things weren't as easy there. Chapter 53, Corruption, the Guns. Not as easy? Twilight asked curiously. So more of a challenge? Rainbow asked eagerly. No, Spike replied. Just more frustration. Because of the anti-air turrets, able to track both the ship and me accurately, we had to go along the ground. Not only did that prove more difficult for me in the jungle, but we also began encountering pirate troops with hyper modes of their own. That meant I had to use my own hyper mode a lot more, Samus explained, and Spike had to use his phased breath. Since both drained our energy rapidly, this was an unpleasant journey. Especially for me, Spike pouted. And the pirates had scared off most of the local wildlife, so there wasn't even anything for me to eat. Though the really dangerous thing for me were the phazon-based weapons some of the pirate troops had, Samus explained. They were like phazon bombs, and if they went off near me, they put me instantly into overload and hyper mode. I'd have to drain the phazon quickly and without warning, after recovering from the hit. She smirked. I did find a tricky way to use the overload. Even when overloaded, the ped would automatically shut down after 25 seconds if I was still functioning normally. If I carefully managed how fast I purged phazon energy, I could keep the overload powering the hyper mode for the full time, dealing much more damage than a single energy tank injected into the ped would normally allow me to do. Rainbow grinned widely as she jotted that one down. Gonna make a killing with this game, she muttered under her breath. Well, it is going to be a platforming shoot 'em up, Pinky indicated logically. Do we get royalties for using our images? Spike and Gandrada asked simultaneously, making Samus and Gore laugh. At any rate, Samus continued, as I said, the enemies we encountered were getting tougher. We even encountered Berserker Knights, scaled down versions of the Berserker Lord we fought back on the Olympus. We found that both the Phazon Beam and Spike's Phased Breath were effective in stripping it of its Phased armor. The first real challenge came not long later. Spike explained. The pair of hunters entered a wide open area, flat ground with a couple of pools of fuel gel, surrounded on all sides by the spiky foliage of the area. As they entered, the gate behind them came alive, sealing them in with an energy field. Two paratroopers took to the air as a gate at the opposite side activated as well. Samus and Spike each took one of the paratroopers. While Samus took hers on with ice missiles and charged beam attacks, the jetpacks were too hot to freeze. Spike leapt on his, dragging it to the ground and attacking it with claws and fangs. At that point, a massive beast roared as it leapt into the glade. It had two legs, though the tusks at the front stretched out large enough to be mistaken as limbs. It had heavy natural armor, including Phased armor on top of its head, a long whip-like tongue and a small, round mouth, and a short tail. On its back was a pirate troop armed with a Phazon lance. Samus' scan visor identified it as a Karak beast. Spike's scanners identified it as lunch. They did not. Spike snapped at Gandrada as the rest of the table burst into laughter. Can you honestly tell me you didn't eat it? She teased with a wide smirk. Grumbling and muttering under his breath, Spike turned away in a huff. Once she got her laughter under control, Samus continued telling of the fight. The first part of the fight was about getting the pirate rider off the Karak. With it in control, the beast was a lot more dangerous. Spike dealt with that by leaping to the beast's back, grabbing hold of the pirate, yanking the lance out of its hand, eating the lance, and hurling the pirate into the fuel gel. As the pirate screamed in death, the Karak went mad and lunged for Samus. she managed to keep it at bay by shooting it in its open mouth a few times before rolling into Morph Ball. Since her scanner showed that it was vulnerable in its underbelly, she dropped a few bombs to injure it. Seeing an opportunity as she unrolled on the opposite side, she locked onto its tail with her grapple beam, yanking back. As the beast reared up in pain, Spike lunged in, digging claws and teeth into the belly as he devoured the phazon-producing organism, leaving only the empty armored skin and the interior bones behind. Dropping the carcass, he belched loudly. "Feeling better?" Samus asked, having noticed Spike getting more and more irritable from hunger since he'd gotten his ice breath. "Much," he agreed. Spike rolled his eyes as several members of his audience chuckled. "What? I was still growing." Gandrata started to open her mouth, only to get Rarity's hoof shoved in a glare from the white unicorn. This startled even more laughter from Applejack, Rainbow Dash, Cadence, and Rundus, but confusion from the Crusaders. "So how'd it taste, Spike?" Pinky asked. "You talked about how nearly everything else you ate tasted." "Well, it was rather tender and juicy," Spike explained. "But the glands that produced its phazon were especially delicious, spicy and tangy." "How was the Karak producing phazon, anyway?" Twilight asked. "That can't be natural." "It's a native of the space pirate base in that region," Gandrata explained. "Since that world had been heavily, and I do mean heavily, corrupted by its own Leviathan, all the creatures there had mutated for phazon production. Which is a pity, really. The Koriks and their Hazars had a much healthier bond before they were corrupted by phazon. The bond they shared before phazon corruption was the closest thing the pirates ever experienced to love." Spike glanced away, not knowing what to say, and feeling strangely guilty.